This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on G-20 Culture Working Group meeting, Protection and Enhancement of Culture. The participants are K.V. Prasad, political analyst, and S. Rangabashyam, anchor.
Mr. Prasad, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
As we all know that the third culture working group meeting of the G20 started off today, and it's a 4-day event from today till the 12th of July. It is being held at the World Heritage Site of Hampi in Karnataka. Apart from the member countries, we have the guest countries and also international organizations, and delegates from all these countries and organizations will be participating in it. What would you say, Mr. Prasad? What all would be the focus areas of this particular meeting?
Well, I think it's very clear that under India's presidency, there are a group of priorities that have been identified. In fact, there are 4. They include the protection of cultural properties, harness living heritage, promote culture and creative industry, and finally, leveraging technology for the protection and promotion of culture. Now, as most of us are aware, the fact is culture was embedded into the G20 format somewhere in about 2021 when there was a Rome declaration of G20 ministers. And remember, this was the post-COVID era, and the culture ministers of G20 agreed, and after all, they're the largest economies, they agreed that for the first time, European culture and used as a major engine for the sustainable socio-economic recovery. Now, since then, the thing has moved forward, and today when India is hosting the G20 and under its presidency, the 4 very clearly identified priorities have been spelled out. In fact, as you mentioned, this is the 3rd meeting. The first and 2 meetings went through the issues of the various things highlighted, and the 3rd meeting, where currently being held in Hampi, will more or less come to terms, draw up the terms of reference, and also call for action based on the conversations and discussions and debate over the last 3 meetings.
Mr. Prasad, as you said, the 4 priorities. One of them is, protection of cultural properties and monuments. All the big monuments like the Taj, the Red Fort, they all have the attention of governments and organizations. But what do you think, about the smaller monuments, smaller properties? It could be a Baoli or a stepwell or maybe travelers, a resting pavilion of the Chola era, or any such small building or monument. They often are not, taken care of.
Well, these are challenges that every country faces. Largely it depends on the priorities of the country and the kind of resources it has at command, and prioritize accordingly. Definitely culture is something in which every country takes pride. And India definitely so has a long history, and we are an ancient civilization. So we are very proud of our culture. But as you pointed out, while the big heritage sites have been maintained because of various factors, and they get a lot of revenue as we go along because of tourism and other things attracted to it, many smaller monuments and probably are forgotten or probably fall by the, in a state of neglect. A lot would depend on the state governments, again, as I said, depending on the kind of resources they have, and match it with the developmental needs, because as a society is growing, development is an ongoing process, and so we have to find and strike a balance. So that's where, and as you pointed out, some of the smaller segments probably get neglected over a period of time. But the focus has been, especially in the last 10 years since Prime Minister Modi has a government in power, has to try and revive this ancient culture, ancient heritage sites, and make people take ownership in sense of the pride and culture. So I think it's a work in progress.
Mr. Prasad, we also have an upcoming roundtable on the preamble and also the guiding principles. Could you elaborate on that?
See, as I mentioned, the first 2 meetings were basically preliminary, where the structure was drawn. In fact, the first meeting, which was held at Khajuraho in February, there significantly Indonesia, which was the outgoing chair, and Brazil, which is the incoming chair, their representatives were present. Indonesia reiterated that culture and creativity are the forefront of sustainability. Now that's very important. Well, Brazil said it will connect to build up these priorities because that's going to be the next presidency. So there is a sense of continuity which was reiterated at the first meeting at Khajuraho. Then when the second meeting took place of the working group in May this year in Bhubaneswar, See, the second and the priorities number 3 and 4, as we identified, were discussed in detail because the other one were gone through in the first phase. So, end of the day, now all these 4 phases have been attended to, discussed and debated. Every country, participating country, invitee countries have come up with their own understanding and suggestion. So, this roundtable will more or less, as you rightly pointed out, will discuss the preamble and come up with the guiding principle. So that, and they'll also call for action and have a terms of reference. So eventually when the final meeting will be held before the summit, the fourth, which I presume should be somewhere in Varanasi, is how it will take and say how this issue can be taken forward.
Yeah, Mr. Prasad, as you mentioned earlier also, this entire evergreen debate of conservation versus development, that's probably, all the more relevant for a country like India and similarly, placed countries. But what would you say, could, in this G20 meeting, could some kind of a guideline be framed to see to it that, development does not gobble up, our heritage monuments or cultural properties or the living heritage? There needs to be some kind of a balance and some roadmap with clarity should be there that how to deal with a situation. Say, for example, road is being built or a flyover or a bridge is being built. In the middle of that, you have a monument. So how do you go about? Either you change the direction altogether, you change the route, or, you demolish the structure and go ahead with development. Do you think, some kind of guideline could be framed in this regard among all the countries?
See, some of these discussions have taken place around, as I said, the 4 priority areas. In fact, one of the most is a discussion when it did take place is the promotion of cultural and creative industries. Now, while you rightly said development and balance with heritage. Now, we all know by very definition what heritage would mean. So once some monument is declared as a heritage, and for instance, Hampi is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Yes. So it has a lot of importance and a lot of things. Similarly, there are some smaller monuments which have historical importance. If they are coming in the way of development, obviously all the people who are the policy planners and policy makers put their heads together and see what is the best course of action. If a detour has to be taken, what is the cost involved? And eventually, these are history because once you demolish, obviously, you cannot have the same structure. So we have to evaluate in the historical perspective. Having said that, as I mentioned, the fact the cultural and this whole concept of promoting cultural and creative industries. Now that's a very interesting because the UNESCO study had come up some point of time its own understanding of this thing, that the contribution of this particular segment is something like 3.1% of the global GDP, and it employs more people, that is in the age group of 15 to 29, than any other sector. And that's why the accent on trying to develop culture and a cross-cutting contribution.
Mr. Prasad, you made a mention about the traditional art forms and our artisans and craftsmen. That is the miniature paintings of Madhubani or the Tanjore art paintings or, brass work of one particular region in Uttar Pradesh or blue pottery of a particular region. Don't you think, somewhere or the other, the middleman makes a quick buck and the craftsman doesn't benefit and neither the patrons and people who want to own them, the consumer doesn't benefit, the craftsman doesn't benefit, and all the profit goes somewhere else. Don't you think this should also be tackled?
Well, I think it has been tackled at a pace over a period of time. This has been happening because remember the government set up the cottage industries, the various state government emporia offers the whole platform to such creative arts, small work. And in a place like Delhi, the very creation of Delhi Haat at one point of time was to allow artisans, craftsmen, people of different trades to come up with their own product, display them there, and people who go and visit there, favor them. Those who like it, buy at the price which they think is right for them, both. So thereby the process of what you mentioned, eliminating the middlemen. But then you see, the question is, it's a large thing, it's a large movement of issues. How do you deal with it? Probably today, one of the areas which the government is also starting is the e-marketing, what is called the ENDOC or something, where it's rivals, it allows platforms for people to connect to the buyers and sellers. So these are issues. You're leveraging technology, but you're right. The artisan should get the value for money, and also the person who's paying the price should know that the money has gone to the right person. So I think it's a work in progress. It's not going to end tomorrow. But then as you progress, the country progresses, people understand the value for these things. These things are bound to change. Mr. Bhasham?
Yeah. Mr. Prasad, let's also focus on one of the other priorities, which is, leveraging technology for protection and promotion of culture. And in the past couple of years, and especially in the last one decade, 10 years, we have seen how technology has really played a very crucial role, even during, testing times like COVID. What kind of role, moving forward in the next 10 to 15 years, do you see that technology can play, especially, digital options which are available with us can play in protecting and also promoting our culture?
Well, I think it's a very important thing. Because today, as you rightly pointed out, the way we have technology, it's penetrating into every sphere and every aspect of our lives. It's the question of how well you are able to use it. For instance, we all now talk about augmented realities, right? We are talking of a different thing. But if you look at leveraging, how do you leverage technology for promotion of culture, its heritage? So there are thoughts, there are studies, there are several case studies which show the successful implementation of technology-based solutions. In fact, one article talked about, on-site 3D scanning, deep learning tools, robotic platforms employed to preserve and promote cultural artifacts and monuments. So, this is something which has been thought about. For instance, there is some study which is probably done in a place in Rajasthan or some technological challenge so it's a limitless area. The question is, how do you convert this and make it both affordable and digitization, as you're talking about? You have advanced scanning techniques. You have lots of things. It's like you have a thought process. How do you use the available technology? How do you leverage it and make beneficial both for the person who wants to visit it and the person who has to preserve it?
Mr. Prasad, we are talking about, the culture working group, and at times it's a very thin line between, culture and heritage tourism. We know of so many countries which depend heavily on tourists for their economy. Do you think, the G-20 countries, the member countries can find common ground to treat their mutual tourists so that they, in a certain way, so that they can have some kind of uniformity, some kind of ease of visiting those places?
Largely, let us look at it. Essentially, as I said, the priorities of every country are different. Some economies are purely dependent on tourism and culture to promote, and their economy is largely dependent on it. There are many countries around that who have received lakhs and millions of tourists every year. There has been a conscious effort to increase tourism, both from the footfalls from overseas and also encourage domestic tourism, because eventually that spurs up economy in a different form and fashion. So this is an ongoing process, but to have some kind of uniformity may not be feasible in that sense, because as I said, there are several visa regulations. Every country has its own travel plans. There are different climatic conditions at different times. So these are issues probably you can have some set of understanding, but to talk of uniformity may not really fall in a place. But yes, you can make it easy for people, for travelers in particular who are tourists and who wants to explore heritage sites and so on. Yes, you can have some trending, but then remember one thing, more footfalls also one has to take care of the ecological interests, because heritage sites have their own value. So I think that people who are conscious of the heritage site and maintenance of that do always try and strike a balance.
Mr. Prasad, India is also supposed to, showcase its rich cultural diversity and heritage and all the art forms, performing arts, whether it is classical dance or classical music, folk music and all that. Can we expect all that to happen in this particular meeting as well, to highlight the rich cultural heritage of the country?
This is an ongoing process since India began hosting the various groups within the G20 format. Ever since India took over the presidency, almost at every meeting there, the delegates, the invitees are given a glimpse of India's rich cultural heritage and a wide tapestry of Indian culture, because every state, within the state, regions have their own set of dance form, their own set of art, the culture, artifacts, so on and so forth. Obviously, it may not be easy to compress everything in a few hours, but yes, as they say, there are two ways of looking at a museum. Either you skim through the museum or you make a deep dive. So obviously you have to find a balance. But yes, India has been doing it. For instance, even at Hampi, there is a tour of that ancient Vijayanagar Empire, which you all know is a World Heritage Site. In Khajuraho, they were taken to the world famous Khajuraho temples to witness those, see those things. Or in Bhubaneswar, they were taken to the caves more than 2,000-year old. So yes, idea is to people experience themselves firsthand the rich tapestry of Indian culture.
Mr. Prasad, it's been a pleasure having you for this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
You were listening to a discussion on G20 Culture Working Group Meeting, Protection and Enhancement of Culture. The participants were K.V. Prasad, Political Analyst, and S. Rangabhashyam. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division,